This is LCC Radio, WLNZ 89.7 here in Lansing, Michigan. You're listening to the Lansing Online News Radio Show with Bonnie Bucqueroux and Bill Castanier, coming to you every Monday night from 7 o'clock until 8 o'clock in the evening. Tonight we're going to be talking about a number of things related to books. We're going to be talking with Randy Riley about the Michigan Notable Books event coming up. We'll also be talking with Elizabeth Homer, who will be introducing us to her new book, Pioneers, Reformers, and Millionaires. And then we're going to be talking with Scott Schuelke, and we're having guests every week this month discussing autism. And Scott is the autism safety specialist. He's part of the Autism Alliance of Michigan. So it's going to be a jam-packed show. But Bill, first you had an announcement about an event this Wednesday.
Yes, the Historical Society of Greater Lansing is presenting its third brown bag at lunch at Lansing City Hall. And this week at 12 noon is former Mayor David Hollister. And the program revolves around the time when David learned from GM that GM was going to leave the city. And then the subsequent Save GM campaign that allowed us not only to save GM in Lansing, but create 2 new plants. So it's pretty interesting because there is some drama in that. It's kind of an interesting story, and he will spend about 20 minutes talking about it, and then you'll answer questions.
And will they be showing any part of the movie?
There's a chance we'll show the trailer from the movie.
Oh,
though.
okay, all right.
And the movie that Bonnie is referring to is there's a movie in final production called, I think it's called Saving GM, that will be used to help train others in collaboration in communities. There's more than 100 communities around here that had to get together, who never worked together before.
And where will the event be?
It's in the Lansing City Hall atrium.
Oh, but that's where the
That's where the
Historical
Lansing-
Society now has a
Yep.
sort of
We're
permanent
sort of, yeah, we're camping there now.
squatter? Oh.
Yeah, squatter. Yeah. The city of Lansing is allowing the Historical Society to use that for a year to see how it works.
Well, that's great. Yeah, it's going to be a good event.
It should be.
I'm a little bit interested too. I was reading the Metro Times article by Jack Lessenberry over the weekend in which he was arguing that, you know, the good news, bad news that Michigan has always had with the General Motors, because on the one hand, it's always been a wonderful source of jobs and a middle class life for a lot of people, but the sort of boneheaded management that's dominated GM for years is still boneheaded, as we see with Mary Barrow with the new problems that she's facing. Now they found a memo that shows she was alerted to the ignition problem long ago. So things are surfacing that are making this new era at GM look troubled again.
GM is probably since 1970 forward been that way. I had a lot to do with them in my job with the state.
Yeah.
Especially in my last jobs in the state when I helped close every GM plant in the state. That was a fun job. Yeah. I really wish somebody could have written about that at the time, but everything was really secret. You know, you couldn't say what plant you were closing until it happened. But I remember some amazing meetings with as high as you could go in GM. And one meeting I talked to people about is after I left it was with all the highest levels of GM. And when I left that meeting, somebody from the meeting called me and said, "I've got to tell you that we can't make our payroll in 2 weeks."
Whoa.
I went, well, who are you? What are you? He wouldn't identify himself, but I'm pretty sure it was probably the treasurer.
Wow.
And it was to pass that word on informally to the governor's office.
Oh.
They were 2 weeks from insolvency back in, that was about 2002.
Oh, it's like 2002. We're that late. Oh, because they ran into trouble in the 70s.
Oh yeah,
well.
yeah.
I mean,
Oh yeah, they were always doing this, but in 2002 they could not make their unemployment insurance payment.
wow.
And the state waived it.
Whoa. See, there's a real history to be mined there that I don't think has ever been captured in full. I really wonder. I mean, I remember my father, who was in that, you know, he was in the Ford shop business for many years, an exec, and he kept saying that, you know, I mean, General Motors just was going to dominate the world forever. Nobody could ever go up against them. And for a cultural problem within the organization itself, it seems it really always suffered from poor leadership. They didn't see or didn't care to deal with the new threat from German and Japanese automobiles. They just seem to be reluctant to embrace the future. They seem to have poor management in terms of handling the economics of the business itself. It's kind of startling.
Yeah, and I think they kept a lot of things like you saw with the Mary Barrow memo. They kept them inside and very secret.
Yeah. They went after Ralph Nader, which was a big mistake, hired private detectives to follow him, which made them really vulnerable when they get caught. I mean, you really look stupid when you get caught. So it's been an interesting marriage that the state of Michigan has had with GM all these years. We've been telling the happy story of the bailout for the last few years, but this problem with the ignition has really clouded that.
Yeah, and they obviously didn't want it out during that whole discussion of bailout, and just right after it.
Yeah, clearly. Huh, interesting. Well, then maybe somebody can win a Pulitzer Prize. Well, that's what we'll do, Bill.
You know, maybe they should make a movie or a TV series like Mad Men.
Oh, covering the auto business in Detroit.
Be interesting.
Yeah.
They were some strange critters in that business.
Well, the Pulitzer Prizes did come out today. There were not many
We didn't win.
surprises at the top. But I don't know. I just, I actually thought about there was a begging email asking people to enter ed for the editorial side, by the way, because nobody was writing editorials or entering them.
You have to beg to enter.
I know.
It's pretty sad.
I know.
Yeah, it's becoming that way, though. It's sort of indifferent to it.
I think a lot of these contests are coming out that way nowadays. They don't mean as much as they once did. We want to be able to click on them and vote for them. We don't want somebody else telling us what's good and what isn't. The two top winners were pretty predictable. We're talking about the NSA Snowden scandal, although I think there was some question whether they'd have the courage of their convictions to give it to them. And then the coverage by the Boston Globe of the bombing in Boston, I think that was fairly predictable. What surprised me and irritated me when I looked at the awards today was that there were finalists in the category for feature writing, but they didn't name a winner. And implicit in that is that, well, okay, you wrote some great stories, folks, but nothing was good enough for us to give a prize to. And I think that if anybody gets named as a finalist, then don't name me as a finalist, because what you're really saying is my stuff is still crap. Because none of them were good enough to get an award. Isn't that awful?
I think it would be terrible. They don't name a long form journalist, do they?
They don't break that out as a special category. They do, no, they don't have.
I didn't think so.
And so feature writing is what that should have been. I mean, something like Avalanche should have won.
Oh, absolutely.
Or Tomato Can Blues, even though it was online. I just think that you look foolish when you don't name a winner. It happens sometimes with the National Book Award, doesn't it?
Yes, twice it's happened.
It's always
not often.
It's uncomfortable, isn't it?
It's also stupid.
Well, yeah, yeah. I mean, why would you enter a contest if somebody's going to insult you by making you a finalist?
And it makes the whole industry look
lame.
By default, lame. Yes.
And in the list of all of the winners, in the newspaper side, there was only one woman. And I thought that was a little bit odd. I mean, in this era, you would think there'd be more women named. So it was a strange day in the Pulitzer Prizes. We'll see. Maybe there'll be more gossip about that as the day goes on, because they just came out this afternoon.
Well, you don't get any, typically, when you won a Pulitzer in the past, the reporter could easily move somewhere.
Oh, it's a huge.
Where do you easily move anymore?
Well, now Stephen Henderson of the Free Press, editorial writer, won for the editorial writing category for this. So that's nice.
Commentary, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, did you get commentary?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I thought, all right. There's criticism, commentary, and editorial. They kind of blend together for me, but they're
vague.
Yeah, a little bit vague. So we'll see what happens with that. We will now switch gears and we will start talking with Randy Riley about the Michigan Notable Books. And Randy's going to tell us a little bit about the events coming up and the Michigan Notable Book, the whole program.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me on the program. The Michigan Notable Books program, every year the Library of Michigan selects 20 books that feature Michigan places, people, and events, and promote them and create a author tour where the authors go to 50 libraries across the state. And the last Saturday of April, which is April 26th this year, is when we hold the Night for Notables event. And that is when we formally recognize the books and authors in a reception at the Library of Michigan here in Lansing.
It's a beautiful facility there, too. I've been in that auditorium when you're hosting those events. It's just gorgeous in there.
Yeah, it's a nice building.
Yeah. So who are the big winners this year?
There are lots of books. The thing about winners is a choice that we sort of say notable intentionally,
yes.
Because when you're looking at good books, it's fairly subjective as to who the winners are. But what we like to do is there are all types of books. So if you like fiction, you'll find fiction. If you have children who want young adult things, you'll find that. If you like nonfiction, if you like history, if you like science, they're all over the board. Lots of great books. Jim Harrison's book made the list this year. I'm a huge Jim Harrison fan. Um,
I think we all are.
yeah, it's a great book. So there's lots of good titles on the book. There's a photography book by the Reeds, Tuesday with the Reeds, which they went out every Tuesday for a year and took pictures featuring Michigan, the state. So that's kind of an interesting title that's there. Linda Hunt's book, Sweetylicious, is about her pies, and so that's kind of the variety of what you'll find. There's a young adult book, The Colored Car, which is about when the railroad had segregated cars, and that's a great book for younger readers. So there's all types. You can go to the webpage and see the complete list of titles that are on there.
Randy, one of the this year you've got a mystery writer as the notable keynoter, right? Who is that?
Yeah, Steve Hamilton is coming in to be the keynote this year. This is our 8th year of having the Night for Notables event, and he's notable. He was on the list in 2012, but he's won the Edgar Award a couple times, which for the best mystery book out there. But Steve will come in. He was raised in the Detroit area, lives in New York State now, but he will come in and is our featured keynote speaker. So we're really excited about that.
Steve was that really a breakthrough writer because he created Up North Noir and made it successful because his plot line takes place in mostly Sault Ste. Marie area in Brimley, and nobody did that 10 or 15 years ago because it was just too obscure, but he made it work, and he won the Edgar twice.
Now he grew up there, right?
No, he grew up in Detroit.
Oh, he grew up in Detroit.
Went to the University of Michigan.
Oh.
He became a computer geek because he said there wasn't any money in writing. And he's worked for IBM since he graduated in the 70s from University of Michigan.
So he's out in San Francisco
No,
now?
he's
New York.
New York.
Oh,
He's
New
at
York.
the New York
Oh, okay.
office, yep. And he does technical writing for him. He's
Interesting.
a lead technical writer.
So
unusual.
how much time has he ever spent in the UP?
Oh,
Clearly enough to be able to.
He spends a lot of time there.
Okay,
He visits several times a year.
He does not seem like a novice to the area.
No, he knows it inside and out. If you don't know the UP, you're going to be dead, not the mystery. I mean, you really do have to know the UP because people catch everything about what goes on there. You can't make mistakes.
Years ago, I read a book, and in the first 2 pages, they had Windschuler's as Winthrop Schulers or something, totally wrong. And it was just such a false note that you wouldn't read the rest of the book. So yeah, you have to be very good on that and understand not just the facts of the place, but the culture.
Oh, and the culture is unusual, as you know.
It is.
It's where my family's from, so it's unusual.
Yeah, I think that's one of the neat things about the program is that a lot of people like to read about places they know or they've been to. And they're also some of the most critical readers if you get it wrong. But that's a really cool thing about the list is that when you're reading fiction or nonfiction, you're reading about places that very likely you've been there before on a family vacation or as a destination. And that's part of the nice thing about the program too. It has sort of created that cultural tourism aspect where people like to go to some of the places that are featured in the books that are on the list, and that's good for everybody.
There's 2 books on the list this year that are with the topic Detroit, and they're both titled Detroit. One is Charlie LaDuff's. Charlie, as we all know, is a pretty unusual character, but he writes a good book. The other one's by Joe Darden and Richard Thomas, Detroit, which looks at the racial conflict in Detroit over the last, 5 decades.
Yes.
And both those books are.
Joe Darden's been here talking
Joe
about
Darden's been here way before the book was published.
Yes,
he
was
said
kind
he was
enough to.
Yeah. So I think that's an interesting take. Those books can become notable books.
I like the list. I mean, it's a great reading list for somebody. I like the fact it comes out just before summer too, because no matter what genre you care to read in, you can find something on that list that you would want to take to the beach.
Yeah, and that, I mean, we hope, I mean, it's when we sit down there, there's no formula that says, oh, you have to have 1 mystery and 3 fictions, and there's no formula. We sit down, we may be looking at 300 books in a year and narrow it down to 20 books, but usually it works out that there are a couple mysteries and there is some fiction, and if there's history that you like, you'll find that on the list too. And even the 2 Detroit books that Bill mentioned, they're different books, Charlie
Charlie
LaDuff's
is,
take on Detroit
yeah,
is quite different than the book that's dealing with the race riots. And, so you can pick and choose which ones fit your taste. I'd like everyone to read all the books
yeah.
like we did, but that may not be the case because some of the subject matter doesn't appeal to everyone. But I think everyone will find at least one book on that list that would interest them.
There is some really interesting books this year. Tear Down: The Diary of a Vanishing City is about Flint.
Hmm.
A journalist from California came back to Flint. He grew up there. He lived there for about a year and wrote about it. It's a phenomenal book.
You enjoyed that book in
It's
particular.
very
didn't you?
well done.
Yeah,
He's got some structure to it. He just didn't fool around with
Right.
it. He knew what he was writing because he's a journalist.
And the book about Mark Fidrich, the bird, Detroit, was a lot of fun. I mean, I think back to 1976 when I was a kid. That was huge fun, and to read about a biography of his life, I enjoyed that book as well. So there's sports books on the list too.
There's two kind of different books this year, though. One is called Taken Alive: The Sites Rock and Roll Tour Diary.
Huh.
Tell us about that, because I know you really enjoyed it, Randy.
Yeah, and that's a book, a band, a Detroit band, the Sites, who are a rock band, and um, it's always hard to describe rock music, but they're sort of a throwback where it's guitar, bass, and drum. But Eddie Bernick, who's the leader of that, he went on tour. They opened up for Jack Black's band, Tenacious D,
Yes.
and he has a diary of what it was like being on a big time tour like that. Which, so if you enjoy,
Tenacious D qualifies.
well,
It's
I
not
mean,
up there with Led Zeppelin.
no, but it's they hit a lot of cities
Yeah,
and did Europe and did across the United States. Well, if you're a smaller band from Detroit, to get
it's still a big deal.
hooked up with
Yeah.
a bigger name and tour. So it's interesting. If you like rock music, you like music books, it has a very unique take on that whole touring lifestyle.
This is LCC Radio, WLNZ 89.7 here in Lansing. We're talking with Randy Riley about the Michigan Notable Books, and there's some real characters here on that book. What is Steve Hamilton going to talk about? What is his theme? Do we know?
No, I already interviewed him this week. Steve's hard to get pinned down on certain things. One was the theme, but I think he's going to talk about Midwest writing
Oh, is he?
and what
Okay.
makes it unique. And he's excited, especially about a book by a first-time author, really. And he edited this collection called The Way North, and it's primarily Upper Peninsula stories,
Oh, cool.
or Northern Michigan stories. And Steve likes the underdog. He says that's part of our culture in the Midwest.
Yeah.
Nobody says you can do it, but you get it done, and that's why he likes Ron Riki, that he put that book together by himself, a collection of stories and poems and things like that.
Yeah.
But I think he'll write about the Midwest sensibility.
Yeah, and Ron Riki, who did edit that book, is a person who every year or so he organizes a tour, author tour of the UP specifically, and begs people, twists people's arms to get them to show up and do a UP exclusive tour of libraries, bookstores, wherever you can take them.
Bars.
That's great. Yeah,
There's nothing
and
excluded from this tour.
there's another book, Poetry in Michigan, Michigan in Poetry, which is an anthology. I kind of refer to it as the greatest hits of Michigan poets and poetry, which is just a beautiful book. And if you are interested in poetry and especially Michigan poetry, that book is probably the anthology that covers Michigan poets.
There's also an unusual pick this year. I think it was the first time a graphic novel was picked.
Oh, which one is that?
It's called Bluffton. Randy, tell us a little bit about Bluffton and
Yeah.
why it's particularly
Yeah,
placed in Michigan.
Matt Fallon is the author, and he wrote this book, Bluffton. It's an area by Muskegon, and it's about a situation. Buster Keaton and his family used to summer in that area. A lot of these entertainers, that's where they would end up, and it's a story about a boy who lives in that area who becomes friends with the young Buster Keaton when they were at Bluffton. Beautifully illustrated book. And it's one of those books, sometimes when you read a graphic novel and you just think, yeah, it had to be told that way. That story could not be told any other way. that book was like that. It just nailed that story. It was the best format to tell that story.
It's interesting because I've always found Buster Keaton fascinating. I think he's one of the unsung film heroes of the United
Yeah,
States.
it's,
Really.
it's kind of interesting to know that during the summers they lived in
Yeah.
Muskegon, put
Well,
on
you know,
summer shows.
I remember driving around there, and there are some roads named for the Keaton family
Yes,
in the
yes.
area, and I ended up on some of them and figured out that's what was going on. Yeah, it's a really eclectic reading list, isn't it? Now, do other states do this?
Yeah, there are quite a few states that will feature or kind of highlight books by authors from their state. No one quite does it the
Hmm.
way we do. I don't think they do as many titles. And the really unique thing about our program is the fact that we take some of these authors to 50 libraries across the state. We
Yeah.
sponsor that. So it's usually within a half hour, 45 minutes, every person in the state could get access to one of these Michigan Notable Book events. They are hitting the road April through June. You'll have authors visiting big and small libraries.
How many years has this been?
The Michigan Notable Books program, as far as selecting the list, started way back when Michigan Week started. George Weeks
Wow.
did that, and it used to be Michigan Reads, it used to
Oh,
be
yeah.
called. The Library of Michigan has been doing it for several years, and we changed the name to the Notable Books program to give it a little more distinguished name and something that stood out a little bit. And we've been doing the Night for Notables, like I said, for 8 years, but this author tour has been happening for at least a dozen years that we've been doing that.
One of the things that we'll have to do on our LansingOnlineNews.com is put a link in to the local author tours. I put a story up, but
Yes.
I did not put the link, and I will do that
Oh, good.
because there's about 4 or 5 local tours here.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah, people will get a chance to see. This I gave the award for the longest book title. In the House, Upon the Dirt, Between the Lake and the Woods by Matt Bell.
And I mean, it is that book, I'll have to say right off, it's fiction. It's not for everyone. It's very experimental.
Yeah.
His story is.
He's the prof up north, right?
Yeah,
Yes, right.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's strange in some parts, but
Further north you go,
he's
no,
he's someone who
well,
you
I
can
know,
just
Charlie
tell.
LaDuff
He should live in the
yeah.
city.
Yeah, but this book is so unique in a voice that you haven't heard before in literature. I think Matt Bell's going to do great things
I think
down the
he's going
road.
to be big time.
Yeah, he's been many people who are powerful are getting ready to really make a push for him, I think.
I think so. He's just
Yeah.
as different as when Vonnegut came along.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
This will be interesting, very interesting.
but one of the
Now,
things
does the
go
state of
through-
Michigan Library keep a shelf of these so if a person wanted to go into the state of Michigan Library, they would find those books?
Yeah, we have all of them in the Michigan collection. As a matter of fact, we have probably the largest Michigan fiction collection in
Ah.
existence at the Library
Oh,
of
that's great.
Michigan. So if you want to look at books of fiction, we're a good place to go to do that.
Now, this event, run us through the time, place, and date, and we can't talk about that there is an admission fee, but we can't say what it is.
Yeah, it's the last Saturday in April, April 26th. It's at the Library of Michigan, right in Lansing, and it runs from 5:30 until roughly 8:30. And the program will have there'll be a short reception when you get there. You'll have the official recognition of the authors, the keynote speech, and then you'll have an opportunity. The authors will all be at tables. You can buy books, get books signed, rub shoulders with the notable authors. There's hors d'oeuvres and drinks. So it's a party setting and it's a lot of fun. So if you're in town and like to go to book events, I think this is, I mean, I'm biased, but I think this is one of the better ones
Oh, yeah.
that's out there. Always top-notch authors and great people to meet and talk to.
One of the things that Randy and I talk about frequently is about how the night for notable select or the notable selection does help kickstart some books and some authors.
Yeah, it does,
helps their
doesn't it?
careers. They get noticed. Randy, tell us just about one or two that you might know that.
Yeah, there's a couple things. So I mean, we have a lot of big name authors. Jim Harrison and
Yeah.
Richard Ford have been on the list, and they don't need the Michigan Notable Books program to sell a book. But a lot of these books are I call them smaller books that may have 500 to 1,500 copies printed, and being a notable book may mean that selling to libraries, you may sell 500 and 600 books just because of that.
Yes.
That's huge to some of these books, which may mean a second printing of a book. It may mean that they actually are interested in your next book. But I mean, Marty Jo Link is an author who her book was on the 2010 list, Isadora's Secret, and she was kind of a true crime person. And her book got on our list. She got a lot of recognition as a writer. And her book this year, Bootstrapper, is again on the list, which is a memoir where she's sort of stretching as an author and doing a different type of book. I think she's benefited tremendously. Jeff Van de Zande, who is an author from the Saginaw area, he lives in Midland. His book, American Poet, it's a small novel about the Saginaw area that sort of has the Retke house, the poet's house, as a part of a central character in that story. His book has gone into a second printing because of being on the list in 2013. Even someone like Steve Lado, who's out there, but his book Death's Door about the Italian Hall tragedy,
Right.
and he wrote about Chrysler's turbine engine car that have been on the list. Notable books have really pushed his books and helped him sell. And the thing is, we have a medallion that goes on the cover. And when that shows up in the bookstore or someplace, a lot of people take a few more seconds to look at that book that has some kind of award on it. And, I'm a librarian, and I would say you should read because you should read. But we also hope this program isn't just about our list of 20. It's about the fact that there are so many talented writers in Michigan. Go out there and explore and find them. They live in your community. We're recognizing 20 of them, but they're all over the place. And that's a big push of the program is Michigan writers, Michigan books. They're worth spending time on. Look for them.
Well, maybe next year we'll get Elizabeth.
That's a good
over.
segue.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Thank you,
And,
Yeah, thanks.
she's going to tell us a little bit about her book, which she'll be eligible to put in for next year. Is that right?
That's right.
Oh, cool.
Absolutely.
Now, Bill said that he read.
Smells new.
It smells new. Now, Bill said that, and I need to move my webcam. So, Bill, while I do that,
The book by Elizabeth Homer is called Pioneers, Reformers, and Millionaires. Now, what makes this book unique, I think, other than the content, is Elizabeth worked both for the Michigan Women's Hall of Fame and also at the Turner Dodge. And this is about a family in Lansing that comes out of the Turner Dodge home.
which
And
family is that?
The Turners
The Turners themselves.
and the
not-
Dodge.
and the Dodges. Both of them?
Yes.
Ah.
Well, my original idea, I was going to write about the Turners and the Dodges, but I started out at the very beginning with Pioneers, and that was in 1834, and so the Dodges didn't come till the end. So it's more about the family and their friends and their connections.
And this was a family that really shaped the city.
Yes, and they had many contributions to the state as well,
Okay.
particularly in politics.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I think, Randy, you made a good point about the fact that people like to come to a place and know something about it. And I think when you come here, you'll probably never be able to walk around without thinking about these people and what they did.
Ah.
It starts out in 1834 with the founding of the city of Lansing. And then it moves. I think you wanted to talk a little bit about politics.
Sure, I'd like to know more.
Well, they were abolitionists and they came with a group from Western New York, very progressive people, and very much affronted by slavery and the Nebraska Compromise and that kind of thing. That led them into founding the Republican Party.
In Jackson, Michigan.
In Jackson, Michigan. When you think about it, Lansing was so small, it had like 1,000 people. And so it couldn't possibly have hosted such a large group because there were hardly any roads that could come in here. I was kind of thought about why didn't they have it at the Capitol? Instead they had it
There's a
in
wooden frame
Jackson.
structure.
But when you think about the founding of our state, it started out in the first tier of counties and the second, and we were the third tier. And so the people were just coming into this area. and often launching from Jackson. And then these people settled in Mason when the capital was founded, and they came here.
Yeah,
And
Mason was really larger for a while, wasn't it?
yes,
Yeah,
mhm,
interesting. I just
yeah.
found that out the other day and was quite surprised.
And so it talks about that. There are many sub themes to the book, but the political theme was the founding of the Republican Party. And I take care to document that and to talk about what they were actually forming the Republican Party for. And it was pretty much to end slavery. That was their main focus. They did have concerns such as balancing the budget,
So something,
things we've all heard before.
so they didn't completely flip from the old days.
No, and also the regulation of railroads.
Oh,
Because in this book, it also documents the rise of the corporations
ah,
and the monopolies and the trusts. And I don't think anybody really realizes how hard people fought against that.
right. And I think what really sort of shocks me as I look back at history is that you think you've won the battle and then it happens again.
And
Yeah, it's a constant battle. It's not just a one time. And they certainly did battle very hard in that era, didn't they?
they did. And it's interesting, too, that there was never any legislative body that ruled that a corporation was a person.
Mhm.
And they fought against that, too.
Yeah.
But it was
They
really
got
the
involved
courts.
in a number of other, both Mr. and Mrs. Turner got involved in a number of other social issues at the time. Tell us a little bit about them, because I know they were involved in the anti-alcohol,
Oh, yes.
suffrage.
Were they
And,
temperance? Were
Oh,
they
Yes,
yes.
right?
Now,
very
this
much.
story runs the whole span of the 19th century. All
Wow.
through that time, the state was just embroiled in battles over the regulation of alcohol.
Yeah.
And I heard on a Ken Burns show the other day that people then per capita were drinking 8 times more than we drink now. And we drink a lot now.
Mostly people were soused all day long.
Yeah,
Yes,
it
they
was
were.
really
I
bad.
mean, it started in the colonial era.
And
They
it
were
was
big drinkers.
It was very bad for women
Yeah.
because they were so dependent on men for their livelihood in terms of income, you know. And
Carrie Nation went into the bars with
oh
her
yes,
hatchet to.
there is a fabulous story in the book about Carrie Nation
Oh,
coming
really?
in 1902, I think it was. I don't think anybody knew she came here. And
I didn't because
in the
actually tried to
newspaper,
find a connection.
Yeah,
the
she's here.
newspaper gave the most wonderful account of her 2-day visit and oh, I'm so sorry. Sorry, folks. And so she gave a two-day account of her coming in, going around to all the saloons, pushing for regulation of alcohol, trying to see the governor and the mayor who ran as fast as they could from her. And it was sponsored by the Women's Christian Temperance Union.
WCTU.
And
There's
they,
a fountain at the Turner Dodge House from that era that was given to the city of Lansing, was it?
it was, it was on the corner of, across from where the hotel is, right on the corner of Michigan Avenue and Grand was there.
It was a complicated era because you saw that there were the suffragettes for whom the vote was the big issue, and you saw the temperance movement, and they had a sort of puritanical, let's get rid of alcohol altogether. And they won. You know, they really won. They formed a coalition that was very powerful. But it's kind of like the good news is you won, and then 10 years later, well, ooh, the bad news is you
Yeah,
won.
Lansing was one of the first large cities to go dry.
Ah.
I mean, a decade before anyone
Well,
else.
there were 5 counties. We weren't really dry. We had temperance and we followed the rules, but we were not dry then.
You mean legally
Eaton
dry?
Rapids was. Well, you could vote as a county. They finally got through legislation that a county could choose.
Ah.
And we didn't choose right then. The
I
Turners,
remember when I came here in 1970, East Lansing was dry, and you couldn't get any alcohol.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. It
Yeah.
switched that year.
Did it?
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. Huh.
yeah.
Yeah. Those were interesting times because they very controversial.
But it documents and shows how the saloons formed or association and fought against women getting the right to vote because they figured it would happen for sure if women got the vote. And then it also documents over this from the very beginning all the work that women did to achieve their rights.
Yeah.
And we really don't have any concept, because we don't know our women's history, we don't have any concept of how hard they worked and so many things that they did.
I read a statement the other day that said we've really only been a democracy for 93 years because that's when women got the vote.
Mhm.
So prior to that, we may have a 200 and some year old history, but only 93 of it is with any kind of real commitment to democracy. Now, did the family have an interesting and colorful life on top? Were they scandalous or upright?
Oh
or
no, they were so upright. They were
Oh.
just wonderful.
Oh,
Well, but there's
well,
a lot.
when
There's
they're dead like
vengeance.
that, we want them to have all sorts of scandals.
No, there were scandals.
Oh, good.
There were great scandals. There were some really terrible things that happened. In the second part of the book, which I thought I was going to be done about then, I discovered that James Turner, the son, James M. Turner, was a reformer too. All of these, the children of the pioneers, who were the reformers, because that's what the Republican Party was a party of reform. They continued to be reformers, and they were trying to get back the party from the corporate takeover.
I see.
And so James M. Turner was particularly a railroad person, and there's some great, incredible stories about fighting with and getting caught between Vanderbilt and the Grand Trunk Railroad,
Ooh.
which it took me 5 years to research that story. But they,
Where did you do your research? Where, primarily?
oh, well, the core of it started out with scrapbooks that Marion Turner owned and had put together. And those were kind of what led me along on the topics, and probably determined how political the book is, because the family was very political. And so that was one way that I did
Where
it.
are the scrapbooks? Are they in
And
the state
they're
archive?
at Turner Dodge.
Oh, they're at the Turner Dodge.
Mhm. But then that led me to the Bentley, because that was the original archives for the state, and there I found some scrapbooks, wonderful scrapbooks of James M. Turner, which documented so much of what happened, which was, I would say, it's been hidden. I don't know, as people just haven't done the research, worked so hard to find it. But these were very progressive people, and they were working against the powers that be. And so, since they didn't win, because it took a long time to win, it wasn't told.
Now, did they live in the Turner Dodge house? Who lived in that house?
Well, they lived in 3 houses. Once, when they came here, they built a little tiny house on Turner Street, right at the bend of the river before you get to where they live now, the Turner Dodge house.
Yeah.
And then, so they lived there, and then they lived in the Turner's house, which was a 2-story Greek revival with the flat top roof, and they lived there for a long time. And then their daughter, Abigail, married Frank Dodge. And then as Marion Turner became elderly then, she sold them the house, and they had a big renovation of the house that was designed by Doris Moon, was one of our most well-known architects. And that's what you see today then, is this larger
Beautiful
house.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things that the family was involved in too, wasn't it the establishment of one of the first female colleges in the state?
Good. Yes. A woman named Abigail Rogers, who came from New York, the same area that they came from, and was probably known by several of the characters in the story before she came, started the female college in 1855, just about the time that the MSU, Michigan Agricultural College, was starting. So the 2 stories are kind of intertwined, except the female college started here in Lansing, and the agricultural college was 3.5 miles to the east in the woods.
Yeah.
And
that's where they made the women do all the laundry and the cooking for the men who were there at college, by the way.
Somewhat.
Yes, they did.
Oh yeah, pretty much. When I
Well,
was
we found
researching
that out
it.
when we were doing some
Yeah.
research.
Yeah, that was.
Yeah.
Welcome
was-
to school.
Welcome to school. You get
Yeah.
to study and do all this stuff down.
Well, the female college, by the time I got to studying the female college, when I read over the board members of the college, I knew who they were because I practically knew everybody in the 19th century
By
of
then, yeah.
Michigan. And, you know, they were people like Russell Algers, who was the governor of Michigan, H.P. Baldwin, who was going to be the governor the next year. There were all these key people from Lansing that were on the board. And they were all advocating for funding for this college so that it would
What
be
was the name of the
substantial.
college?
It's called the Michigan Female College.
Michigan Female College.
And it was
I
on the
never even
campus
heard
of
it.
School for the Blind.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so all through this book, they're trying to get it, and they never succeed. Here they are, the most powerful men, and they can't quite get a majority vote.
Wow.
So they came close, but they couldn't get it. And in the meantime, the agriculture college is starting. And this book is interesting because I think it starts before most people know where the story starts.
Yeah.
Because it starts right when they're all kind of just hacking down the stumps and stuff, and it talks about what they went through. And
Where did the
and,
family's money come from?
Well, when they came, they were pretty poor.
Oh, okay.
And James Turner, the father, came, and his father died, and his mother, and she went to Jackson. They were in Lenawee, which was kind of between Ann Arbor and Jackson. They came, and he was employed as a merchant, a shopkeeper, for a shopkeeper in Jackson. And he started out as a traveling salesman for the shop, and then he and another man from the same area, Casanova in New York, formed a shop in Mason. And so that's how small it started. And how did he get his money? Well, he was a very brilliant man. He could do almost anything. And he started out as a land agent, and he would deal with the Bank of Rochester, and the Bank of Rochester would use his work as a land agent, but also lend him money so he could buy land.
Well, let's let our audience find the rest of the story. How can they get the book?
Well, the book launches the 29th, and it's at the Old Time Marquee, and you can get a book there.
That's in Old Town, right on Grand River.
Old Town Marquee, I'm not familiar with
It's
that.
the old dime store.
Oh, is that? Oh, it's under a new name now?
Right. And the reason it's there is because the Turner Dodge had severe damage this winter because of pipes bursting.
I heard about that. Yeah. So they've got
really
a lot of work to
awful.
do. So you'll be there signing books on that
I'll be
day?
signing books, and you can get a book that way. But you can also get it at a few places around town. You can get it at, starting with East Lansing and Mackerel Sky, Curious Bookshop.
Oh,
Come down Michigan Avenue to Everybody Reads Bookshop.
yes.
And then Absolute Gallery in Old Town and Gibson's.
Is there a Kindle version?
And by the 29th, there will be.
Oh, good. So people can go to Amazon and get it there?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Get the Kindle version and download it.
Mm-hmm.
Will it be at Schuler's out here? Schuler Books?
Now, those things will happen after I make the final arrangements for the distribution, and then the distributor will make those arrangements.
Those arrangements.
So it isn't in those stores yet, but it will be.
What day of the week is the 29th? Do you know? Is that
Tuesday.
Tuesday.
It's a Tuesday.
night.
And you'll be there Tuesday evening, and you'll be there in Old Town.
5:30 to 7.
At the Marquee, it's called? Oh,
Old
cool.
Town Marquee.
Well, that's great. Well, this is LCC Radio, WLNZ 89.7 here in Lansing, Michigan. Thank you very much, well, Elizabeth, and
Thank
we're
you.
looking forward to
We'll see you
having
soon.
seen the book signing.
Okay.
And we're now going to introduce Scott Schuelke, who is here, and he is an autism. Now, tell me, what is this all about? Autism Safety Specialist. This is a designation I'm not familiar with.
Yes, I was given that title. I work for the Autism Alliance of Michigan. I'm a retired sergeant from the Lansing Police Department. I go around the state of Michigan. I train police officers, firefighters, emergency responders, bus drivers, families, educators on autism safety.
So that when police interact with autistic people, they're safe, and they're because we've seen some really disturbing statistics recently that quite often police officers aren't trained for handling people who have special conditions. Is that the kind of training you're doing, or is it community training?
Well, it is. It's all community training. But
okay.
what we're doing is we're teaching the police, the fire, the EMS, the bus drivers. We're even training Delta Airlines to recognize people with autism because everybody with autism is different.
Oh, really?
The saying in the autism world is once you met one person with autism, you've only met one person. But
Oh, that's a great saying.
It's
I
a
like
great
it.
line,
Mhm.
yeah.
so it makes it very tough for emergency responders to identify people with autism. And many times, people with autism, their behaviors are misinterpreted by the general public. They're calling the 911 centers and they're saying the man out on the street corner watching traffic is intoxicated, he's high on drugs, he's crazy. Well, when the police officer gets there, at least now maybe they can identify this person as having autism and take a little
Ah,
bit different approach than they would with a person who's intoxicated or high on drugs.
we've seen so much of that, the problems that the police have. They've really become sort of our first line of defense as we don't have community-based programs for people as much as we did in the past. The police have been the people trying to handle people who have special needs in the community. And I don't know that I've ever heard of special training for autism. Is that new? Is that,
This started probably little over 3 years ago. I was approached by a mother from the Mid-Michigan Autism Association. Her name is Lisa Gross. She's from DeWitt. She's the state of Michigan autism administrator. And she asked me, how much training has the Lansing Police Department had in autism? She goes, there's been a couple incidents where the person with autism and the police officer didn't do very well. And we would like to put together a training in Mid-Michigan for police, fire, and EMS so they can learn to recognize people with autism. Maybe they can communicate and interact with them. Uh, so they asked me to do this. And
mm,
I had to think, I don't have a family member with autism. I didn't know a whole lot about autism, but I told them I would. And we put together the training in Mid-Michigan along with the Mid-Michigan Autism Association. And the training went like wildfire.
now, was there a national program you could look to that had done some of the spade work about what police need to know?
Yeah, there's a national expert, Dennis DeBaugh, out of Florida. He's
Okay.
originally from Southeast Michigan, and he trains all over the world. And we consulted with him. We also consulted with people from the Mid-Michigan Autism Association. Then my background as a law enforcement officer. We put the trainings together, and right away, Sheriff Gene Rigglesworth from Ingham County said he wanted his whole department trained. He said he can see the numbers on the rise. He said not only is it the right thing to do, he said, this is risk management for my department.
Absolutely. No, Gene is forward thinking on those kinds of things. I'm very glad to see that because it would be easy, I would think, knowing the dynamics of autism for escalation to happen because they're not going to comply automatically with being barked at by, in typical authoritarian police voice. I suspect that's what do you tell officers to do? How should they approach somebody?
Well, you have to be calm. Many times a person with with autism can read your body language. So model and calm body language is very big. Many times a person with autism won't make eye contact with you, where generally in law enforcement, one of the first things you learn, if they're not making eye contact, they're usually not telling you the truth, just like your children. But a person with autism generally doesn't make eye contact. They may also be nonverbal.
Yeah.
Up to 50% of the population is nonverbal. So we teach the police officers different ways of possibly communicating with a person with autism. And one thing we always tell them to do is work with a family member, a care provider, because no one knows them better. No one knows that person with autism better than that family member or a care provider. They know what triggers their outburst. They know what keeps them calm and so on.
Touch is another problem, isn't it?
Yes, many people with autism do not like to be touched. That can trigger a meltdown. Uh, my recommendation to them is the only time we touch them is for their safety or someone else's. Never go hands-on. Don't even do the simple touch on the shoulder. Now that may change when they get to know the child better or the person with autism better. We have a East Lansing High School resource officer from the East Lansing Police Department. He gets a hug from a young man with autism every day.
Oh,
So, it's once he got to know him, that's fine.
What was the most interesting thing? Because you had a learning curve yourself on this. What was the most interesting thing you found out that you introduced into your training?
Uh, the characteristics of autism. There's so many different characteristics, and like I said before, everybody's different with autism. That's what makes it so tough for an emergency responder. They're expected to make a split-second decision out
right.
there, and to do that, they need to learn some of these characteristics. A person with autism may have, a couple characteristics. They may have a few, they may have a lot of them, but they're all different. So these characteristics, the lack of eye contact, the lack of vocabulary or verbal communication is big. Many people with autism dangerously wander. It's the actual term's called elopement. So that is one of the biggest things we do when the police officer or the firefighter goes out to look for a person with autism that has walked away or wandered away.
This is now, are police officers getting trained in other forms of mental illness too, and how to identify them?
Yes, more and more. There's more push to do that. I'm pretty specific to autism, but what I've been told by many police officers and firefighters and family members and families who have family members with autism, they say what you're teaching us can be used with other, populations. Other, I had a Ionia County firefighter said, my sister has Down syndrome and she has autism. He goes, everything you're teaching here will work there with her also.
Yeah.
So.
Well, one of the shocking things is the explosion in the numbers of people who have this condition. Because I think maybe 50 years ago, police officers didn't have to know as much about this because they simply didn't run into these situations as often. But now it's probably quite common.
It is quite common, and I tell them in training, if you haven't met somebody with autism, if you haven't made a call with somebody with autism, you will. The numbers are 1 in 68 children born now in the United States are on the autism spectrum. People with autism, a study from 1993 says they're 7 times more likely to come in contact with law enforcement than a member of the general public. Well, that's because many times their behaviors are misinterpreted, or those characteristics they have put themselves in danger, such as dangerous wandering. A person with autism may walk right down the middle of the street, lacking no fear of danger, not understanding that they're going to get hit by a car. Drowning is also a leading cause of death for people with autism. So one of the things we teach the police officers and the firefighters right away, if somebody wanders, check your water sources immediately, whether it be a swimming pool, the river, a hot tub even. Check those immediately. That's the first thing you do because they're drawn to water. Many times when a person with autism wanders, they wander towards their favorite place. Many times. Sometimes they just wander to wander, but sometimes they're wandering. They may like the East Lansing Aquatic Center. They may like an ice cream parlor or restaurant. Many times they will go to these locations.
It's so
It's pretty amazing. I can see, and like other things we've talked with autism, we can see crossovers like with Alzheimer's.
Yes.
Similar kinds of responses.
Very similar.
And they look terribly dysfunctional in a neighborhood if they end up there.
Yeah. And many times they don't understand that they're putting themselves in danger. Walking in the middle of traffic, walking off a dock into the water. They're not understanding the river's going to drop right off, things like that. So that's where your emergency responders are getting trained. Right now, we've trained well over 7,000 people in the state of Michigan, over 5,500 emergency responders.
I guess, so you do this full time now?
Well, it's more like full time. It's supposed to be part time.
I see.
But we've got great feedback. I was in Muskegon last week. I was in Detroit at the Children's Center the week before. In Sault Ste. Marie, I was there. Our training is actually going to the state of Washington in May. They've asked me to come out and they would like to adopt our training for the state of Washington criminal justice program out there.
So this started right here in mid-Michigan?
It started right here in mid-Michigan, right in the Lansing area.
That's marvelous. And I really wish, too, there were even more opportunities to train communities because, when I watch my Nixle, I'm signed up for Nixle.com, and then that means I so often see, a child has wandered away or an adult person with problems has wandered away. And it's a real difficulty if you don't know how to approach people and deal with them, and you can make the situation worse, not better.
Yeah, that's true. And one thing we're doing with the community is we're not just training the police and fire and EMS. We're training the families to be proactive, which they are. We're training the educators. We're now training bus drivers, which the bus drivers tell us they have never had training. Sometimes they don't even know when they have a child with autism on their bus. So this is going
over. School bus
over.
drivers too? School
bus drivers, intermediate school bus drivers. We've trained Henry Ford Museum. We've trained the Detroit Zoo. We just started
security guards at malls.
The
list would be endless.
Hospital security guards. It's endless. They come to our trainings. The feedback's been great. We just started a new autism program at Metro Airport. with the Metro Airport staff. It's called On Board with Autism. One of the worst places for a person with autism because of their sensory issues is the airport with the large crowds, the noise, maybe getting patted down by TSA,
Security.
the lines. You're right. So we've started a new autism program there with them.
I've been in some airports that you feel like you're on an LSD trip when you're going, with all the lights flashing above.
Oh, definitely.
I was in a restaurant yesterday. I felt like that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's kind of sensory overload can be a real problem.
Oh, it can be a overload. If you ever been in Metro Airport, there's a big tunnel that goes
That's
under
the
the
one.
runway. Well, that tunnel, the lights, the noises, you can actually shut that off now.
Oh, you
There-
can?
Yeah, there's a button, and we had them put a big sign by it where a family with a person with autism, other special needs, where it may bother them, they can shut it off, and they'll shut off for 5 minutes.
That's
It's a
fantastic. I didn't know
fantastic
that.
story.
Yeah.
Oh, that's wonderful. See, these are the kinds of accommodations we're going to have to get better at, I think,
Oh.
because this is clearly an emerging part of the culture now.
Yeah, and many of the organizations are doing it. Like I said, the Detroit Zoo's been phenomenal.
Oh.
Henry Ford Museum. I'm training the Detroit YMCA Summer Park staff now. We're training Lansing Parks and Recreation summer staff coming up here in June.
We'll be having a visit from Bob Pratt in the future, and he does the Great Lakes surf safety, and it seems all the lifeguards in the state need training in this as well.
Well, Bob Pratt, it sounds like might be doing some training with us. So
Yeah.
him and I have already talked, and
And
we
yeah.
have a similar backgrounds as an emergency responder also. So he's got a great wealth of knowledge.
Oh, that's wonderful. I mean, all this cross-fertilization is taking
And I'm
place.
really amazed it's happening.
This
I'm
is the
really
kind of
happy.
community response we always hope will happen.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know, and
It's been great. Like we talked earlier, Sheriff Gina Rigglesworth was a big push. He really got this started. And once the other chiefs in the fire department saw that Sheriff Rigglesworth was doing this, they got good feedback on the training, and they all started jumping in. So it's gone over very well.
now, can you tell me again how many days of training it takes for an officer to learn all of these skills?
Well, we have a 2-hour training program.
2 hours?
2 hours. When I developed this training, I told them, I said there's a couple things had to happen. I said, one, it has to be something that the police officers, firefighters, and EMS can use in the street immediately.
Yeah.
It can't be a bunch of studies because we'll lose them. They
Right.
won't sit in there. And I said, two, it can only be about 2 hours long because they can't sit still. And
Well,
I know that from experience. We give them everything they need to know. Now, can they learn more? Of course. And we do have other programs we're starting to develop that are more in depth. But for a police officer and a firefighter, just to learn these characteristics, different ways to communicate and interact with a person with autism goes a long ways. And we've had some great success stories.
That's fantastic. I love this. This is one. I mean, I'm an old community policing person and used to work with Gene on programs out for Ingham County. And one of the nice things about sheriffs, I think, is that because they're elected, they understand they have to keep the community happy, and
Yeah.
that's a nice inducement to be forward thinking on things like this.
Okay. Gene's very forward thinking. A lot
Yeah.
of training. He does a phenomenal job.
I think one of the mistakes too is that people, because we see so many male examples, there are women who are autistic as well. Is there anything special you have to do in working with women who suffer from the condition?
No, nothing.
The basics hold the same.
Basics hold the same. Boys are generally almost 5 times more likely to have autism
Exactly.
than a girl.
A lot higher.
So it's a lot higher. The only thing we really know about autism, it's genetic. You know, it runs in families.
Yeah.
So
It's certainly been a fascinating era to watch this happen. Thank you so much to all of our guests this evening. We've been talking with Scott Schuelke. He's the Autism Safety Specialist with the Autism Alliance of Michigan. Is there a website where people can go to get more information?
yes, you can go to the Autism Alliance of Michigan.org.
Okay.
Just Google it and bring it up.
Oh, that's
You can also
wonderful.
look at the Mid-Michigan Autism, who is your local advocacy group.
That sounds great. And thank you so much to Elizabeth Homer. And her book again is Pioneers, Reformers, and Millionaires. And it's going to be on the 29th that we're going to see you in
Thank
the
you,
evening.
yes.
And then thank you to Randy Riley on the 26th is the Michigan Notable Books event at the State of Michigan Library. So make sure to see Randy there with all the 20 different books that are on the list for this year. And thank you very much for tuning in to Lansing Online News Radio with Bonnie Bucqueroux and Bill Castanier. And we will be back next Monday at 7 p.m. This is LCC Radio, WLNZ 89.7 here in Lansing, Michigan. And make sure to tune in next week. Thank you very much. As soon as I press this.